This is your city. This is your city wants to know. We want to know the background, the heartbeat of what makes up our beautiful cities. We dig into the backstories, from the struggles to the successes of our local entrepreneurs, small business owners, artists, not-for-profit organizations, and the many, many people who make up the intricate tapestry of our communities. Real people, real stories, by you and for you. But wait, that's not it. I love giving my opinion. Just ask anyone who knows me. We can't get enough of the honest, gritty feedback of places that we spend our hard-earned money. I'll give you the good, the bad, and the ugly of the places I eat, sleep, and visit. Disclaimer, my opinion only. All right, so come on, let's get to it.
Good evening, everyone. It is I, Kim, once again, your host for This Is Your City. Today, I have a great guest. I have been waiting to do something like this for a while, and now I have the opportunity, and I'm really excited. And we're going to kind of go through this a little organically and see how it goes. And we might have a session 2, a part 2, because he's so full of information. He's a wealth, a fountain of information on this important subject. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I'm hoping that you enjoy listening to this, watching this as much as I'm enjoying communicating with my guest, Richard Capriola, today. So let's get to it. I'm here with, as I mentioned, Richard Capriola. Today we are talking about teen addictions, youth addictions. This is a very serious conversation. This topic is extremely important, especially right now, the times that we're in. You probably already know, you've probably seen some of the stats, but the mental health of our teen during the last year of lockdown, globally, we're not just talking North America, globally, has been astronomical. Rates are higher than they've ever been in recorded history for our youth, and substance abuse is part of that. And so today I have an expert, and I'm so excited, Richard Capriola. He has been a mental health and substance abuse counselor for a few decades. He recently retired from Menninger, I hope I pronounced that right, Richard, Menninger Clinic.
You got it right.
Awesome. In Houston. And he worked as an addictions counselor for adults as well as adolescents for well over a decade. He's an author as well of the book, The Addicted Child and a Parent's Guide to Adolescent Substance Abuse. Addicted Child, a Parent's Guide to Adolescent Substance Abuse. Extremely important subject. So thank you, Richard. Thank you for joining us. How are you this evening?
Thank you, Kim. It's great to be here with you. And thank you so much for hosting this interview on this very important topic. And I'm glad that you brought up the issue of mental health, because this pandemic has had such a tremendous impact on both adults and children throughout our country. And it's been going on for over a year now. And the Centers for Disease Control has noted that since the pandemic began, there's been a 24% increase in emergency room visits by grade school children. And there's also been over a 30% increase for teenagers who are urgently in need of some type of mental health care. And I'm afraid that we're just scratching the surface on what we're going to see as we come through this pandemic, how it has impacted children and adults in both mental health and addiction. So I'm very, very happy that you brought that issue up at the very beginning, because it is so important, as is the entire issue of adolescent substance abuse.
Absolutely. You just gave a stat that I had no idea about, and it truly just triggered an emotion in me, and I just started welling up. Adolescents, youth are like, what was that percentage of the hospital visits for the young? 24%?
There's been a 24% increase in the emergency room visits by grade school children.
Grade school children. Oh my gosh, that just truly just made me emotional. Wow.
Yeah, it's a pretty staggering amount.
It is.
Yeah.
Increase. Yeah. And as you know, I had this call out that I originally wanted to do, which was for, maybe because May 31st is World Anti-Tobacco Day. So I had started out thinking, okay, vaping is what's cool today. So maybe we should do something on vaping and teens and adolescents. And the more I started talking with you and knowing what you've done in your career, this subject just opened so many other doors. And that's why I feel just speaking about vaping isn't enough. And we need to delve deeper into this topic, Richard. And I mean, you've dedicated a better part of your adult life in this subject. So you're the best person to have talk about this. You are the professional, not only with adult addictions, but teen addictions. So I really am grateful that you have taken the time to talk about this with us.
Well, you're very welcome. And I wrote my resource to help parents. I wanted them to feel less afraid and more equipped to understand this issue, to have the tools to be able to deal with it if the situation arises, and to educate them about adolescent substance abuse, how drugs work in the brain, what are the warning signs parents should know about, what are the assessments that are important for a comprehensive diagnosis, and what resources are out there. And I also wanted them to know a little bit about how disorders like eating disorders and self-injury can often accompany drugs. So I packed all of this into a book that runs only about 100 pages and is very easy, user-friendly, but I'm hoping that it'll be really a good educational resource for parents that will not only help them understand this issue, but give them a sense of hope that if they are confronting this issue, that there is a way out.
Right, yeah. Because, I mean, it is the parents, especially for the younger ones, that are caught up in the middle of this as well, not knowing who to turn to, where to go, what to do. I mean, that doesn't even encompass all of the family issues that can come from this, or that the addiction stemmed from the family issues. But
yeah. And it is a family issue. We focus on the child because that's the immediate concern, but it affects the entire family. And parents go through their own set of emotions as they're dealing with this. Many times they question, how did I miss the warning signs? Well, they missed the warning signs because nobody told them what to look for, or they begin to question if they've been a good parent. So they go through their own set of emotions as they're trying to deal with a child who's also struggling with alcohol or some drug use. So it gets very complex, and it does involve the entire family system. And many times we focus the attention on the child, but the parent needs help too, and the parent needs support as well.
absolutely. And you touched on something just a second ago. You were talking about eating disorders and stuff like that. When we speak of addictions, teen addictions or what have you, it's not just drugs or alcohol. There's other things out there. I don't know. Do you just specialize? I don't want to say just, please. I apologize for that. Minimize it. Do you specialize in alcohol and drugs, or is it all encompassing?
I worked as an addictions counselor, and addictions is a rather broad term. Certainly it involves alcohol and drugs. That's what most people attribute it to. But there's also a classification of what we call process addictions, and these are behavioral addictions. The alcohol and the drugs tend to be chemical type addictions, but there is process or behavioral addictions, and these include things like eating disorders, self-injury, gambling, pornography, video gaming. These are all process addictions, and they have many of the same characteristics as the alcohol and the drug addictions have. They all increase dopamine in the brain, which gives the person the surge and the good feeling that they have. Many times, and the reason I put a section in my book on these process addictions, like self-injury and eating disorders and cell phone use and things like that, was many times they accompany a child using alcohol or drugs. I've had young girls, for example, who were smoking marijuana and were also cutting on themselves. So many times these process disorders will be in addition to a child who's using alcohol or a drug like marijuana.
Right. And okay. So yeah, we're gonna have a part 2 to this because there's way too much. Okay, so let's just start with marijuana for a second, because that just brought a thought. So many, especially the younger people, but because marijuana now in many parts of the world are becoming legalized, and we won't get in any debate about that, whether it should or shouldn't be at this point in time. Medical marijuana or recreational use. So many people are saying they put marijuana in a different category than any other drug or any other addiction, saying marijuana is not, you can't be addicted to marijuana. I truly don't believe that. I come from a long line of addicts of whatever it might be, alcohol, prescription drugs, hard drugs, whatever it might be. Marijuana is definitely one of those. What do you say to that?
I say that there's a big difference when it comes to adults who choose to use marijuana and adolescents who use marijuana. And the difference is in brain development. An adolescent who's using any drug, whether it's marijuana or any other substance, is in the process of introducing into their brain a chemical that quite honestly has the potential for causing damage. So adults are adults. I don't want to judge them for the decisions they make. It's legal in a lot of states for adults, but my focus is on adolescents. And I have worked with a number of adolescents who have been smoking a lot of marijuana. And when I asked them to help me understand why they smoke so much marijuana, the number one answer that came back was, it helps me with my anxiety. And when the psychological tests would come back for these young men and women who were smoking a lot of marijuana, what I noticed was that the processing speed of their brain was below average, their short-term memory was curtailed, and their motivation was very, very low. So the point that I'm trying to make is that when it comes to an adolescent, we need to recognize that they have a brain that is in the process of maturing and developing. So it's very important that parents protect that child's brain. And in order to do that, one of the things that we do to protect the brain is to keep it away from substances that are harmful to the brain, like marijuana or any other illicit drug or even alcohol. It's the big difference between adult addiction and adolescent addiction. One of the differences is in brain development. The adult addict has a fully developed brain. The adolescent brain is in the process of developing. So it makes the use of any type of illicit substance much more dangerous for that child.
I'm probably going to get this wrong, so forgive me. You can help me with this.
Okay.
I think I read somewhere, is it 25 before, especially in males, where the front, is it the front cortex? I don't even know, forgive me, isn't even connected yet until around the age of 25. Is that correct?
You're absolutely right. It's the prefrontal cortex of the brain, which is the last part of the brain to mature. Our brains mature from the back to the front, and the prefrontal cortex is right behind the forehead, and it's the last part of the brain to become fully mature at around age 24 or 25. So why is that so important? Well, that part of the brain, that prefrontal cortex, is responsible for abstract reasoning, higher order thinking, the ability to weigh pros and cons and make good decisions. Well, that part in the adolescent brain is still in the process of developing. So again, we get back to the issue of protecting that adolescent brain.
Wow. And that just, when we hear that, that just brings a lot of things into focus of why we should be so diligent as parents, as adults, in being diligent, and I'm going to use the word strict. Yes, be strict in what you're seeing your children and allowing your children to do. It's not developed. It's not developed. So if we're like, well, they're 18, they can do what they want, let them smoke marijuana, let them do this, let them do that. No, we still have to be that front and that protector, even if it makes us look like the bad guy, because they're not developed and they don't have that reasoning that we do as adults.
That's right. And they're more likely to be more impulsive. They're more likely to experiment and much more likely to engage in risky behaviors without realizing what the consequences of those behaviors can be. So it's up to us as parents to help guide them, to educate them, for example, in terms of their brain developing and how these substances can affect their brain, to teach them about the neuroscience of substance abuse so that they become educated on it and they understand the consequences of using these substances and how they can affect the brain.
Yeah. Even if they don't want to listen, tell them anyway. Because it's going to stay in there. Some parts of it are going to stay in there, even if you have to tell them over and over again.
Well, and when I was working with teenagers on their substance use, it didn't do me any good to tell them it was illegal. They already knew that. It didn't do me any good to tell them that their grades were going to drop, or that they might not graduate, or they might not get a job or go to college, because they didn't believe any of that. So I was wasting my time. But what did make a difference? What made a difference and caught their attention was the neuroscience. When I could talk to them about how their brain is developing, when I could show them the different areas of the brain and what each area of the brain is responsible for. This area of the brain helps with speech. This area helps with coordination. This helps with processing, information. And then I could show them where marijuana attached itself to different areas of the brain. The light bulb went on, and they become very, very interested. So all I'm saying is that for me, I used the neuroscience approach to capture these kids' attention, and it worked.
Yeah, so don't be afraid. Don't underestimate your children. Don't be afraid to talk about the science part of it, thinking that they're not going to understand or something, because they will, and it will grab their attention and their interest. So don't be afraid to talk about the science of it, not just like you said, it's illegal, you're going to do bad in school. That's more nagging in their mind. In their mind.
Yeah, that's nagging, and that's just things they've heard over and over and over again. So tell them something they don't know. Tell them something that they might be interested in. Take the time to learn a little bit about the neuroscience. You don't have to become a scientist. You don't have to become an expert, but you can learn the basics. And the key point is the brain is developing. You need to protect the brain, and drugs are bad for the brain. It's pretty simple, but you have to approach it from the standpoint of capturing their attention and their interest.
Right. Because they're just going to roll their eyes and go, yeah, I know.
Right.
Yeah, I know. Right.
Yeah. So it may take several discussions to get this. They may not be interested the first time, but maybe the second or third time something will click, and they'll be a little bit more interested.
Yeah. So let's get into a little bit about, some of the warning signs. You said that parents should be aware and be alert. And sometimes that's easier said than done. Most times it could be easier than we think it is. We just got to take the time. But what can you give us some of those early warning signs to parents that we should know about?
Sure. In my book, I have warning signs for marijuana use. I have warning signs for alcohol. I have warning signs for a child that might be developing an eating disorder. I have warning signs for a child that might be self-harming themselves. And I have sat across from a lot of parents, and I've gone through their child's history of using alcohol or drugs, and I've given them the diagnosis. And when I finished, they would many times look at me and they would say, I had no idea this was going on. Or if they did suspect their child was using a substance, they would look at me and they would say, well, I knew something was going on, but I didn't know it was this bad. So part of why I wrote the book was to help parents not get into that position. So they didn't know the warning signs because nobody told them what to look for. And I think that's very common, that most parents want to avoid this topic, or they think they'll know the warning signs when in reality they don't. But as a general rule, what I advise parents to do is pay attention to the changes that you see in your child. You know your child better than anyone else. So pay attention to the changes that you see. Don't assume that the changes you're seeing in your child is just normal adolescent acting out. It might be, but it also might be an indication that there's something else going on underneath the surface. So check it out. Some examples of what I'm talking about would be, you may have a child who was earning very good grades, and now the grades are starting to slip. You may have a child who used to enjoy participating in sports, no longer wants to participate in sports. You may have a child that was very social and outgoing, now becomes very isolating and very away by themselves. You may have a child who would often introduce you to their friends. You knew who their friends were. You may have known who their parents were, now becomes very secretive of who their friends are. So these are just some examples of changes that when you see them in your child, and the more of these changes you see, the more concerned you should be. And the longer these changes last, the more concerning it might be. So the best thing to do is when you see these changes and you're concerned, you need to get an assessment and check it out to see what's really going on.
Definitely. And you touched on what I was going to say too. Don't just leave it as, oh, they're just going through a phase, or, oh, this is normal adolescent behavior. You know, they used to like this, they don't like this. They're growing out of it. That might be so, but it is our responsibility to look into it and not just let it go, you know. And I know personally, different families, my own family, different families, where sometimes the parents aren't on the same page. Maybe the parents have had a different background each. And so one is a little bit more in the knows some of these things. And the other one was raised in a little more sheltered life, so they don't know. And then that brings conflict in the home of how they're going to help their child. And what I'm going to say, and I'm hoping, you know, you can, you know, expand on this. Yes, it may be a phase. It may be, but we owe it to them to not take it as a phase and do something about it. Pry, right? We're allowed to pry. We're parents. Would you agree to that?
I would agree that you don't want to just assume that it's some normal adolescent acting out. That's a very dangerous approach to take. I think you're better off to get it checked out, get the assessments done, and if it is just adolescent acting out, fine, then you'll get that reassurance from a professional. If, however, there's an underlying mental health issue or psychological issue or something driving that, then you'll know that too, and you'll get some help and some direction on how to proceed. Delaying is probably not going to work out very well.
No, because the older they get, a couple things can happen. They can go deeper into their addiction.
Yes.
Or the older they get, the less, and I don't want to use the word control, but for lack of better words, I'm going to use that word, the less control you have on them to be able to do something. There's going to come a time like when they're 18, 19 that they can decide, I'm not going to any doctor and you can't make me, right? Yeah. Doctors can't do anything.
And the other thing you want to know about is if there is an underlying issue that's driving your child to, say, smoke marijuana. Let's say it's anxiety, or maybe it's depression, or maybe it's something going on in school. Maybe it's being bullied, or it could be any number of issues, or maybe it's depression that you're not aware of. Kids are very good at hiding their emotions. You, as a parent, want to know about those underlying issues, because if you just treat the drug abuse and you don't treat the underlying issue, the chances of that child staying away from a substance for any extended period of time is very, very low.
Yeah. And then just get maybe deeper into other stronger stuff as they get older.
There's always that possibility. You know, almost all addiction starts in adolescent years. It's in the teenage years. So the sooner you can get on top of it, the more likely you are to be able to help your child and get them past this. The longer it delays, the more chance you risk in the addiction becoming more and more severe, or them moving on to more dangerous drugs.
Definitely. Yeah. Wow, that's incredible. And so you talked about parents being alert, being in the know. Sometimes that's very difficult, especially when your teenagers don't want to talk to you. So give us some ideas, some examples of how a parent can protect their child from getting involved in substances. Like, what can we do? Not just let's see the warning signs, but how can we protect that?
Well, I think the first thing to know is that no child is totally protected. And as a parent, You don't want to assume that because of where you live or the income that you have or the church that you go to or any other factor that your child is somehow exempt from getting involved in alcohol or drugs. That's a very dangerous approach. So all children are vulnerable. There are protective environments, but no child is totally protected. So the best you can do is to create that protective environment. And a lot of that involves developing from a very early age, or even later as they get older, a good communication system with your child. So what do I mean by that? We're pretty good at listening to other people's words, even our children. You know, when we talk to them, we hear their words. We're not so good at hearing the feelings behind those words. And that's a skill that every parent can practice and can learn, so that when our child is talking to us about an issue or we're talking to them, we're hearing not just their words, we're hearing the feelings behind those words. That's a topic that I address in my parent workbook that accompanies the main book. But the point I'm making is, if you can develop that good foundation of communication with your child, you're more likely to be able to talk to them about these issues of alcohol and drug abuse. And if they encounter a problem, they're more likely to come to you. There was a survey done that asked teenagers, what is it that keeps you from talking to your parents about things that are on your mind or things that are troubling you? And the response that came back was a fear of being judged. Kids fear being judged by their parents. So I think parents can go a long way to develop this good communication pattern with their kids, to listen to their kids' feelings, not just their words.
Wow. You know, it's things you think you know. And then then you hear it again, you know, from an unbiased person, because, you know, you don't know our lives, you don't know our children, but you've done this so many times in your life that you know, but we think we know that. Yeah, listen to your kid, of course. But do we really? It's just like, do we really? And as you say, if we have that communication line open from a young age and we listen to our children, to what they're saying, how they're saying it, maybe, just maybe, we'll be more in tune with the warning signs if they come, right? Like we can be more in tune because we know our child.
Right. And your child is more likely to come to you and look to you in terms of being an advisor, especially when they get in the late teenage years.
Yeah.
You know, we sort of move away from being a dictator to being an advisor. We want our kids to come to us and ask for advice and feel comfortable doing so. But they have to, you know, learn that skill themselves. It doesn't come naturally.
Yeah. Move away from being a dictator to an advisor. I'm gonna write that down. That's really good. Because
Well, you want to be a dictator for part of their growing up. You have to be a dictator. You have to be the parent. You have to be the one that sets the boundaries and the guidelines and what's right and what's wrong. But then as they get older, particularly as they get into the late teens and then into adulthood, you want to become an advisor. You're not there to tell them what to do because that's not your role, but you're still the parent. So hopefully they're turning to you and looking for you to give them advice. They'll make the decisions, but you become the advisor.
Yes.
But that's that's late teens into adulthood. That's not early adolescence.
Right. Now, in your work, in your field of work, I mean, you have counseled countless adolescents, teens, young adults, families, even adults. What do you see? Do you see more? Maybe there isn't, like you said, there's no separation from how much income you have, what church you go to, what neighborhood you live in, how you grew up, right? Do you find parents who are more friends than they are a parent? Do you think they have more chance of their children becoming addicted or not because they've been a friend? Or did they blur that line? Does that danger their children more? Or is it really no separation?
Well, I don't think you want to blur that line. I think you want to maintain that you're the parent, they're the child. You know, you are the authority figure. You are the one who is in charge, and they need to understand that from a very young age. In terms of addiction in itself, we know that 60% of a person's vulnerability to become addicted is purely genetics. So it's like any other disease. If a woman has breast cancer in her family, she's more at risk. It doesn't mean she's going to get breast cancer. It just means she's more at risk. If you have diabetes in your family, you're more at risk of developing diabetes. The same is true of addictions. 60% of a person's vulnerability is genetics. So what's the remaining percentage? The remaining percentage is those environmental influences, those environmental factors, you know, and that's a whole range of things. The kids that I worked with, because I worked in a large psychiatric hospital, had not only a substance abuse issue, but a serious mental health issue. It might have been anxiety, it might have been depression, it might be an emerging personality disorder. It could have been a lot of different issues, and those often co-occur with a child's alcohol and drug use. That's why it's so important, if you suspect any type of substance abuse, to get a comprehensive assessment. You don't want just the addictions assessment, although you need that. You need a comprehensive assessment, a psychological assessment, a neuropsychological assessment, a good physical exam. You want to create a complete picture of what's going on with your child.
You know, and I can't stress enough how important what you're saying is. It's not something to be taken lightly. I know personally people who would listen to what we're saying right now and go, oh my gosh, that's so overkill. So my kid smoked a joint. So what? So my kid, you know, you were a teenager. Oh my gosh, I hear this all the time. You were a teenager once. You knew how it was. But that doesn't make anything better. Those excuses don't work. It's not overkill. It's not over this top, because woe is us if we are the one saying, this is overkill, it's nothing, it's no big deal. And then we are living through the ramifications of our decisions later on in life when they can't function.
It's no big deal is a very dangerous attitude for a parent to take when you're confronted with a child who might be experimenting with a drug or using it infrequently, and to minimize that, knowing the effect that it has on the brain, knowing the likelihood that that child's infrequent use might very quickly escalate into daily or multiple times a day use, or might venture into more dangerous drugs like cocaine or methamphetamine or some other substance, is a very dangerous approach to take.
Wow, it is, definitely. I want to stay on the subject for a little bit here, if you don't mind, about parents.
Sure.
And the reason I want to stay on it a little bit more is because, like you said, things are genetic. You know, 60% you said are genetic. And so what about enabling? Let's talk about enabling for a second, because I mean, you've done the counseling, so I'm sure, you know, these things pop up once in a while. Parents enabling their child, and that could be making excuses for them, saying it's no big deal, you know. But this, do you think this is a major factor in adolescent addictions, is the enabling of a parent? And before you answer that, and I also mean that in a sense, like, you want to be their friend, or, you know, maybe your household isn't the best environment and you're feeling guilty about that. And so you want to protect your child, and you think you're protecting them by holding them in your little circle. Maybe your marriage is bad, and so you don't want them to suffer from that. So you enable them, like, it's okay, coddle them a little much, or what have you. Speak to us a little bit about that and parents enabling, because there's a couple little alleys there you could take as well.
Yeah, I think there are situations where parents do enable, their child, maybe look the other way, maybe minimize the use because of other things that are going on in the family system. And it could be any number of things, and they sort of let the child have a pass, or they tend to look at it as being an issue that they don't want to deal with right now. They've got other issues that are more important that are going on in the family. Um, and I think the other big issue is that parents either don't believe this can happen to their child, they don't know the warning signs, and then if they do discover it, they tend to maybe minimize it a little bit because it hasn't gotten that bad yet. So in the early stages, they may look at it, well, okay, this is probably just a phase that my kid's going through, or there's other things, or I don't want to confront the kid with this right now. This is not a fight that I want to have. I've got other things to deal with. And I understand that, that parents can get in that situation, because things can get very complicated. They can get very, very messy at times. But my message to those parents is that's a very dangerous approach to take, because you don't know when casual use might escalate into extensive use. You also don't know whether it will venture into other substances. Drugs are very available out there for adolescents, and they know it.
Yeah.
They know it. When we ask kids, how easy do you think it is for you to get marijuana? 80% of seniors tell us it's very easy if they want to get marijuana to find it. When we ask them, well, how easy is it for you to find something like LSD? Almost 30% of seniors say it's easy, it's not a big problem. And the same is true for alcohol. Almost 80% of them will tell us it's easy for them to find alcohol. So the drugs are out there, they know they're out there, and they know they have access to them if they want them. So it's a dangerous situation out there.
Yeah, and parents can't be so naive. Honestly, you cannot be so naive to think that it is not accessible to them, because it is always accessible.
Yeah, and I think part of the reason that parents are naive is because they don't see it. They don't, they don't see marijuana every day. They don't see LSD. So, they don't hear about it all that often. So they assume if I don't hear about it, it's not there. Well, it is there. And the other thing that makes it complicated is that not only do kids know that these drugs are readily available, they don't see them as very harmful. They don't see them as very harmful. When we ask seniors, how dangerous do you think it is to smoke marijuana regularly? Only 30% of them think it's harmful.
Wow. Yeah. And you're, just to clarify for our listeners, when you're saying seniors, you're saying seniors in high school. And
I'm not talking about seniors my age. Right. I'm talking about seniors in high school. Thank you for clarifying that.
But I'm surprised that it's 30%. I would have thought it would have been higher. That they know the dangers, and they just don't care, because listen, society calls it recreational drugs.
Yeah, that sounds fun.
It's almost fun. It sounds fun. So why would they think that it's harmful?
Right.
Right.
And they see their peers who are smoking marijuana or drinking alcohol, and they don't see any negative effects on their peers. So if they don't see it, they assume it's not there.
Right. But they only see their peers certain times of the day or what have you at night when they hang out, but they don't see them around those they let loose on, like their families or their home.
Right.
Or, what's hiding and brewing inside.
They don't see a lot of the negative consequences that are associated with abusing a substance, because they're not around when those negative consequences are coming out.
Right. And then if they are, they've kind of gradually probably worked through it together because you've been around each other doing it. So it still seems normal because you're doing the same thing they're doing.
Right. Yeah. It's almost like a culture. It's almost like their own little world that they live in, and it's all they know. It's all they know.
And upbringing, background. I can say for me personally, like I don't really have a lot of secrets. People who know me know. I had a major problem with addictions when I was younger, and there was no, at that time in my circle, my life, there was no let's go get you help. There was no, something's wrong. It was, oh, it's no big deal. It's, oh, she's not doing that. It was a total blind eye. The warning signs were there, but it was a lot of blind eye, or just snap out of it, or what have you. And I was really good at leading a double life too. So knowing those warning signs will help your young adults, your adolescents, not have to live a double life.
Yeah.
And become very good at it.
If there's one advice I could give to parents is learn the warning signs, know what to look out for, be on the alert. Don't become paranoid over it, but be on the alert, educate yourself, know what to look for, be very vigilant. And if you do see some of the signs, then, don't delay, look into it and see what's going on. You may see those signs at a very early age, or you may not see them until the late teenage years. Every child is different. But the best advice I could give to parents is learn the warning signs, pay attention to them. And if you need to, get the assessments done so that you know what's going on. Because the bottom line is there is hope, there is treatment, there are options that you have as a parent, and every child is different. Some children will do very well in outpatient treatment. Some children will do very well in intensive outpatient treatment. And then some who have the serious underlying issues that are driving the substance abuse, they may need longer term care. But every child's different.
Every child's different. And don't think that it can never happen to you. Right?
Yes, that's a very dangerous line of thinking.
So right now, Richard, we are in this crazy world that our young ones are growing up in, this COVID world, this pandemic. Everything is different. And let's put the pandemic aside for a second. This world we live in is completely different from when you were a teenager and I was a teenager. Yes. A lot of it's the same, just different, but it's the same because there's nothing new under the sun. But this pandemic, oh man, speak to us a little bit of that and the mental health and compulsive behaviors of our youth, our adolescents.
Well, the pandemic has had a tremendous effect on adolescents as well as adults. It's affected everybody. It's changed and disrupted our entire way of living. For adolescents, it's taken them away from their schools. It's taking them away from their social environments and their friends, from their sports activities. It's confined them to home, to almost like distance learning. It's an entire different world for them. And it's had an effect on them in terms of their sleep and their eating, their depression, their excessive worry, because they worry not only about themselves, they worry about their parents, they worry about their other family members getting infected. It's a real worry that a lot of adolescents have. It leads to irritability, sometimes aggression, and a withdrawal from social activities. And I'm afraid that we are just scratching the surface on the mental health issues that are coming about with this COVID. And I suspect that as children move back into the traditional school setting, that we may see some more of these issues start to develop, because now they've got to readjust back into the school environment that they've been away from for almost a year. And for some kids, that's going to be a difficult adjustment.
For some kids, it's going to be massive adjustment, like social anxiety. At that age, we're all trying to figure things out. Who am I? Who are you? We care way too much about what people think at that age. It's normal, I suppose. But to reintegrate them into the system, the social anxiety is going to be crazy. Like now they have to get back in and, right. Oh my gosh, that brings me to another subject, but they got to get right back into it and be a part of people they don't know.
Right. And if you have a child who already has a certain level of anxiety, you can imagine that the stress and the heightened anxiety that's going to bring about for that child as they try to reintegrate back into the traditional classroom. parents, I think, just need to be sensitive to that, to know that that may be, for some kids, it may be a difficult adjustment, and to be able to be prepared to deal with their child as they try to go through this adjustment.
Right. And another thing I want to point on, like a year, they've been out of this normal, if we can call it, world. Social media is another thing that we can spend hours talking about, and the effects of our youth and the addiction of social media. But going back into a regular routine of school and stuff again, one thing we have to remember, a lot of our young adults and our youth, our adolescents, have developed this false life on social media.
Yeah.
And now they're going to have to go back into the real world and be like, oh, everybody's going to find me out, right? Like, because, I mean, we have Photoshop and editing, and we have this and we have that, and we can be who we want to be. And, you know, and then we're back into normal society, and that can just push some people over the edge.
Yeah, because they've created, it's a disconnect between the image that they have created on social media versus the reality of what's really going on. And that can be a difficult confrontation that a child has to deal with, particularly if they're going back into a social environment where a lot of their peers have a different perception of them through social media than what they're going to actually see.
That's tough. I would not want to be a kid right now. Oh my goodness. I'm sure every generation they say that, but oh, no way. No, thank you. No how, no way.
Well, every generation has its own challenges. This one has got some really unique challenges because of the COVID epidemic. Also the substances that are out there. They've been around for years and years and years, but there's been some differences over time. Kids are still gravitating towards alcohol and marijuana, but the marijuana that's out there today is not like the marijuana that was out there in the 60s and during Woodstock. It's much more powerful these days.
And that's another thing that the young adults and youth are not really aware of. It's not the same. You know, they can come back at you and throw it in your face. Oh, well, you did it when you were a child. I shouldn't have. You're right. I did when I was a teenager or a young adult. I did. Should not have. But it wasn't the same. They're mixed with a whole bunch of chemicals. It's not the same. And that's even going to affect your brain even more because it's not developed. Now these substances have more chemicals, like marijuana is a natural plant, but they mix it with chemicals. Don't fool yourself.
And the component of marijuana that gets people high, it's called THC, but that is much more powerful now than it's ever been in the past. During the 60s, the THC content might have been around 2%. Today, now with it being hydroponically grown and cultivated, that THC concept percentage can go much, much higher, which makes it much more damaging and much more addictive.
And dangerous, definitely, yeah. Well, before we wrap it up here, I want to talk about your book for a second. So you have the book, The Addicted Child and a Parent's Guide to Adolescent Substance Abuse. And I encourage everybody to go out and get it. You can get it on Amazon, but you have a workbook that goes with this book. And for parents, would it be typically for parents?
It is exclusively for parents.
Okay. Can you talk to us about that workbook a little bit?
Yeah, I wrote the workbook because I wanted to have a document that, again, would be very short, that parents could use to work through some of these issues that they're dealing with, having a child that they've discovered is using a substance. So it has a number of activities in it. You'll go through, you'll identify your child's substance use. You'll identify how it's affected your family, how it's affected you. It will have you actually write a letter to your child expressing how substance use has affected you and your family. And I encourage you to write that letter and perhaps share it with your child. There is also a very brief exercise on how to deal with anxiety. And then there are some tips on communication that we were talking about earlier, how you can practice the skill of listening, not just to your child's words, but to your child's feelings. So the workbook, again, is very short, but it has a number of practical exercises and activities that I hope parents will find will be helpful. It's really meant to be a companion to the book, which is an education tool.
Wow. And I love how within the pages of the workbook, you say you'll be challenged to examine how your child's substance abuse impacts both your child's life and your life.
Yes.
And I think that's paramount because we need to challenge ourselves, but it's not easy to admit that we may have had a role in our child's addictions. I mean, knowingly or unknowingly, and usually it's unknowingly, it's not easy to challenge ourselves and to admit to anything. And I believe strongly that in order to help our child, help our family, help them, we really need to look at ourselves as, and I'm not talking about being a prideful, like, oh, this is all my fault, and get into that, whoa, no, because your child needs you. So you can't go into that attitude. But sometimes there's little things within that role that we can look at ourselves and go, I need to stop this.
Yeah. And I think my recommendation would be, if you are using the workbook, that you work it in consultation with either a good friend, another family member, or perhaps a counselor, that you can work in the workbook and then share what you have written in the workbook with somebody else to get some good feedback and to process that information. Because I think that can be helpful if you're getting feedback from somebody that you trust.
Absolutely. And I think this is just my perspective, in my opinion, and I'm putting it out there. When we do go through this workbook and we start and we read your book and we start to internalize things, thinking, okay, I could have saw that warning sign, or I could have done this better, whatever it might be. You know, maybe you were a bit neglectful. Maybe you had to work like 2 jobs just to support your family. Maybe there was some substance abuse in your family, or marriage is wrong, or it doesn't matter, verbal, physical abuse. It doesn't matter what it was. If we recognize it, we can work on that. And here's the important thing I want to get to with that. This could help your child's addiction. And I'm 100% that this could be helpful. When you see those, it's okay for you to bring that to your child when you get into those discussions. Admit it and ask for their forgiveness, because that could set that child on a whole new path of recovery if you can ask their forgiveness as well.
I think that's very powerful, because what you're really saying, I think, is that it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to be vulnerable to your child. It's okay to talk to them about your experiences and your feelings and your failures, and that it's okay, that you don't have to be perfect, and that I love you and I accept you for the person that you are. And this is what I've gone through, and I've made mistakes, and I apologize for the mistakes that I've made. It's just a question of being vulnerable, and it's hard for people to become vulnerable. But the real definition of intimacy is vulnerability.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for that. I really want to thank you. I really want to speak to you again. And if you're willing, we'll get together and we'll speak again. There's so many questions I have. But as time runs out, sometimes, unfortunately, we'll have to leave it for the next time. And
that's very good. Thank you so much. And if people who listen to this, or anybody that you're talking to, if they have questions, if they have issues that we didn't address, and I know that there's many other issues that we could have talked about, I'll be more than happy to come back to have another discussion on this.
Definitely. And in the meantime, I want everybody to go get your book. I mean, you have the Kindle version and you have the paperback version. Both can be found on Amazon. You have,
yes.
Yep, you have your, what is it? Is it helptheaddictedchild.com?
That's exactly right. Helptheaddictedchild.com is the website. People can visit the website. They can read book reviews. They can read endorsements. They can read a sample chapter. There's a link that'll take them directly to Amazon, where they can buy the Kindle version, which is priced at only 99 cents, or they can buy the paperback, because a lot of people like to have something they can write on and highlight, which is great. And they can also purchase the parent workbook if they want to do that. All of that's available through the website.
Yes, and I highly recommend getting the workbook with the book, because it's a process, and it's a process that needs to be worked through. And so the workbook is going to be a roadmap to help you with that. So I highly, highly suggest and recommend getting the workbook along with the book.
Yes, thank you. I think that would be very helpful for any parent. If you order the paperback, it's a nice resource. You can keep it on your bookshelf. You can loan it to a friend who might be struggling with this. But the bottom line is, hopefully it will help you feel a little bit more confident, a little bit more secure, and a little bit more prepared in the event you're confronted with this situation. Perhaps it won't be such a crisis.
Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I have here again, folks, it's Richard Capriola. Richard Capriola, and he is the author of The Addicted Child, A Parent's Guide to Adolescent Substance Abuse. Addicted Child, A Parent's Guide to Adolescent Substance Abuse. It's extremely important conversation to have with your family, to talk about these things before they get out of hand. Richard Capriola, make sure you get his book, make sure you get his workbook.
Thank you, Kim.
Thank you. And to you, my listeners, as always, I am forever grateful. So make sure you tune in. I will let you know when we have the second part to this, because we will. I think it's very important. And as Richard stated, he is available if you have any questions or concerns about your own experiences and with your children. Reach out to him. He will be there. He'll help you. We'll talk about it. And he's got his website and helptheaddictedchild.com. So let's go to his website, get the book, or Amazon. But we will see you soon. Thank you once again, listeners. Have a great evening. Stay safe. Stay blessed.